All right, all right, all right. Hey, welcome to another edition of the Journey to Freedom podcast. I'm Dr. B. I am your host, and just as always, and you guys know, this is my favorite. One of my favorite things in life to do is to have these podcasts. And Ted, I don't know if you know this or not, but about 4 years ago, I went to a trust leadership seminar. A guy by the name of David Horsager out of
Yeah.
Minnesota has seminars that he does every single year on trust leadership and what it means to trust. And I go into this, I guess I go to this event, and there's 400 or 500 people that are in the room, and this is some really good material. And I look around the room, and there's only, I don't know, 30, 40 people of color that are in the room, and I'm counting, and I'm going, well, how come my community is not being exposed to this at the level that I am
Huh.
right now? And I've never
Okay.
been to one of these
Okay.
before. So I'm thinking maybe this isn't like something that happens all the time. So I came back home, and I work with the Issachar, Center for Urban Development, and we're doing stuff. And I'm saying, how do we get this into our community a little bit more? And I started building some coaching programs and that kind of stuff. And then I said, you know what, I'm going to start a podcast because there's got to be some Black leaders that are in
Huh.
the community that are doing some amazing things. And I started praying about it, and God said, "Well, I don't want it to just be Black leaders. I want it to be Black men." And I'm like, "Oh no, I don't want it to be
Okay.
Black women because I know a lot more Black women who are doing stuff than I do Black men." And God's like, "No, I want Black men." So, and that was we decided to do that year. 100 episodes is what was my goal. I'm going to do 100 episodes of Black men from all over the country, and I ended up doing 105,
All
and
right.
it was just so eye-opening for me because we have all the stereotypes. We have the dads that don't aren't real, aren't good dads or aren't part of the family, and the destruction of the family. And then we have, hey, we just communicate in the barbershops. We'll never talk about love and trust and finances and money and all that kind of stuff. What I realized is there's a whole lot of people doing a whole lot of good stuff. And I did have, several of the folks that I've interviewed have been incarcerated. And I have had several of the folks of the men that I talked to where they grew up with only single moms as their mom. And so the dichotomy between what it meant to have a family and what they're trying to do with their family. I had men that, doctors that are just doing some phenomenal
Hmm.
stuff. I have men that are, where he said, my son is going to go to Brown University or go to an Ivy League university, and we're going to do it from the time he was born. By the time the kid was 4, he was speaking 3 languages and had traveled all over
Whoa.
the world and ended up
Whoa.
going.
How
What was
about
kind
that?
of cool about that one, he ended up going to Brown, and then he ended up playing soccer in Brazil, and he ended up taking over a company. He has his PhD right now, and I got to interview him and said, "What was it like to
Okay.
be this kid that your life was determined?" So it has been so fun. We're over 250 episodes now, and I have
That's
Ted
great.
Travis on today. And if there's something I know about Ted is not one, he's excited about life. He is so excited that he is on this planet and that he is making a difference because I've seen him several times in my life, and not one time have I ever seen him not smiling, not excited, not happy, not willing to share. And so you guys are in for a treat today. I've asked Ted to tell his story because I know he wants to tell about all the cool stuff he's doing with youth, which is great, and we're going to talk about that. But I wanted to find out a little bit about you, Ted, and where you grew up because I don't know that story. So that's going to be
Okay.
new for me, and
Okay.
where you
Yeah.
grew up and how all that worked, and then
All
we'll
right.
chop it up after that. But thank you for being on. Thank you for being part of our podcast today in this journey to freedom
Thank you.
that we are working on. So the floor is yours. Go ahead and tell us all about you.
Hey man. Well, thanks so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. Yeah. Tell them a story. Well, I grew up in New York. I came from a poor family. I grew up on the north side of town that was divided by railroad tracks. But I was a musician, and music is what I was just absorbed in. And I graduated with music. In fact, I applied to to college, and I got in with a double major, going after a double major: music ed instrumental, music ed vocal. I wanted to be the head of a music department, and that's what I was working on. And as a part of that, I completed my instrumental requirements in about 2.5 years. And so the following year, I switched to voice, and then in my fourth year, I applied and was accepted to study at the Vienna Conservatory,
Okay.
in Vienna, Austria. So I was there for a year, but that's where my life dramatically changed. I walked into this international chapel and heard the
Hmm.
gospel, and gave my life to Christ. And that changed everything. I ended up spending 2 years in Vienna. I completed my year at the conservatory, and then I stayed a second year and changed my major to a just a straight BA in music, because my goal now was to be a missionary. And I told God, God, I'm
Okay.
willing to go anywhere you want me to go, except the kind of neighborhood I grew up in, which
I'm not going back to New York. You ain't getting me back there.
got I lost that one. So yeah, that's what happened. I finally was convinced that, okay, Lord, if you want me to go back to the community, to the kind of community I grew up in, I will do that. But at that time, there are a number of organizations in serving in Vienna at that time, because Vienna was the gateway to the Eastern Bloc countries. So there were major Christian organizations that were working in some way, shape, or form, with
Hmm.
church, with Christians behind the Iron Curtain. And those are the people I was exposed to over those 2 years in
Hmm.
Vienna. Really was a transformative experience for me, to be around these missionaries. But I had no peace about joining any of their organizations, and so I decided, well, I'll my pastor had been was a graduate of Denver Seminary, and so I said, well, I'll go to seminary. I'll go there. I'll learn a little bit about American Christianity, on my way to becoming a missionary overseas. That was my thinking. But
Hmm.
when I got to Denver, got to seminary, I began to hear about this place called Five Points. And I said, 5 points.
Hmm.
In fact, I remember the students were talking to me about it. No, I heard them talking about 5 points. I said, wow, that's an interesting place. Is a um,
What year was
uh,
this? Can give me an idea about around what year this
Sure.
was?
This was in 1978.
Oh, okay. Cool. Okay.
1978. I was hearing about
All right.
5 points. And
Gotcha. That makes sense.
and I said, "Wow, that's an interesting place." Where have you ever been there? They said, "Oh no, we've never been there." I said, "Okay,
Hmm.
well, where is it?" And they said, "Well, we don't know." And I thought, of all the
We
places I
talked
heard
about it.
about,
No.
Five
Okay.
Points was the place I was drawn to. 5 Points. And
Okay.
so I ended up, thinking about I began working. I worked for a while with a storefront mission, working with some young people there.
Okay.
And then Youth for Christ approached me and asked me to join their staff, and which I did. And I began working with kids, first through referrals. I would get referrals from the juvenile justice system, and I started working with kids. This one kid was a leader. He was the best thief on his block, and
Okay.
and and he came to me once and said, "Ted, um, I like hanging out with you. Can I invite some of my friends to come along?" So the next thing I know, I have an instant club, a group of
Yeah.
young people that I'm working with on a weekly basis. Okay, um, and that just never stopped. After a year, after that second year of working with YFC, during that time I began asking questions about how can I how can we really make a difference in the lives of these young people? I grew up in a
Hmm.
neighborhood similar to theirs. I really wanted to go beyond just the traditional youth program presenting Jesus, that sort of thing. I felt like I felt like I was doing that, but I'm
Hmm.
telling them about Jesus, and yet they're dropping out of school. They got problems at home. I mean, they've got gang issues and drug issues and all kinds of things. And I said, how do you connect the two? And so I was wrestling with that. And one thing I decided I needed to do, I needed to live in their neighborhood. I had
Okay.
learned this from missionaries saying, to the best of your ability, you live among the people you serve. And
Hmm.
missionaries live in glass houses. The life is an open book. They're able to
Yeah.
examine you as well. And so, with all of that, I moved to the neighborhood. And so when I
Okay.
moved to the neighborhood, I ended up leaving YFC and moving into Five Points, and then that was an experience. I remember moving in this house I was trying to buy, and in the first week I moved in, I got robbed twice, and I got broken
No.
into and robbed twice. And I can remember sitting in my living room praying and just wondering what's going on. And a few of the guys that I've been working with came over. They came over, they saw me, they saw the broken window, and they said, "All right, Ted, you're one of us now."
Wow. You got to
So
experience it.
I said, "Okay."
So,
So I
yeah.
realized,
Well,
I realized that I had experienced what they'd experienced. I positioned myself to be able to experience some of the things that they've experienced,
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
that made a difference. That really made a difference.
But
And
I
so,
guess where I'm kind of lost there, and for those of you who are watching from all over the country, right? When he's talking about Five Points, we're talking about an
oh
area
yeah,
of Denver, Colorado, that has
yeah,
been gentrified since, a little bit, I
yes.
guess,
This is
and
before
it
the
has.
gentrification.
This
Yeah,
was way before then, and it was
yes,
it was the place of hood. Like when I was growing up, we would go down there to the barbecue place. I don't remember what the name of it
yes,
was, and my dad would get like pig feet sandwiches and that kind of
yeah.
stuff. And
Zonas.
excuse me. So,
You
but
go to
you came
Zonas.
from New York, right? You came from inner city New
Right.
York, which the Denver Five Points is
Long
not.
Island. Long Island. Yeah.
No, Long Island. Okay, so you come from Long
Yeah.
Island, which has got way more people, way more stuff going on than little Five
Yeah.
Points here in Colorado that we're thinking is our rough patch or whatever it is
Well, Five
that
Points
is
was
there.
Denver's.
But you did get
Five
robbed.
Points was 5 Points was Denver's answer to Harlem. That was the place where blacks
Yes,
were
yes.
allowed to
There you go.
live, and so
Yes,
and have
exactly.
businesses there. Okay, um, and
Hmm.
so yeah, so I moved into the neighborhood, began working with kids, and began wrestling with a question that actually it was John Perkins, who I met in '82, that he asked me a question that really became a defining quest for my life. He asked the question, "How do we build incentive in our youth?" And
Hmm.
I understood. He's talking about how do we build internal motivation. I mean, one of the questions you said we might talk about is how do black men get stuck and unable to move forward? And it made me think of John's question for me, because I think that question kind of came out of that sense that how do we break through? Our young people are struggling, and how do we break through them? How do we create internal motivation for them? And that became a defining quest for my life. And so as I worked with kids, I began to and ask that question. I began to find clues. One was um, the school in my neighborhood. The school district decided to turn my elementary school into a magnet school and into a Montessori school. And so, my kids were going to go to that school. And so I remember walking through the hallways and peering into the rooms. And if you've ever seen a Montessori operation work, you look at
Hmm.
this classroom and you've got kids walking to different different stations, learning stations, and a teacher is not
Hmm.
maybe sitting off to the side while the kids are going and on their own doing the work in those stations, and they would check in with the teacher and go back and forth. And I thought I saw this internal motivation. And I thought, this is happening with elementary kids. I wonder if that could happen with middle school and high school kids. So that was a clue. Um, the next clue was a
Hmm.
young man that had joined our club. His name was Jimmy. And Jimmy was a an OG. um well, no, I take that back, he's an OG now. He was his family actually was a part of bringing gangs from Compton to Denver, bringing the Crips from Compton to
Really?
Denver.
Oh
Yeah.
my God.
And he had his own gang, but he also lived in the
Hmm.
same neighborhood where the kids I was working with lived. And he would occasionally join them to come over to my house for Bible study and rap session. And then one summer, he came with us to summer camp, gave his life to Christ. And then he continued to meet with us for a while, and then he kind of disappeared. So I wasn't quite sure what
Uh-huh.
happened with him, but he came back and he said, "Ted, I want to do what you're doing." And I thought, okay, if he's serious about wanting to do what I'm doing, I mean, I've got to influence him. How am I going to do that?
Hmm.
And so I
Right.
brought him on staff. I brought him on
At Youth for
staff.
Christ or just
No,
what
no, no.
staff
At
is
this
it?
time, I had left YSC. I started neighborhood ministries. And so I brought him on staff.
Okay, neighborhood
And
ministries. Okay.
I
You brought them on
began
your
working
staff.
with,
'Cause I'm saying Youth
I
for
got him
Christ
on
wasn't
my
going
staff. That's right. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. But some of my board members were a little questionable about that. But I brought him on anyway because I figured if I'm going to influence them, I got to have them with me.
Yeah.
And so I did that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I showed him everything. Everything. I
Okay.
exposed him to everything. Okay. I mean, I took him with me when I went to speak. I would share the podium with him. I took him with me when I met with church mission organizations to talk about
Mm.
possibly supporting us. I opened the books. I showed him how things worked, how finance, how as much as I knew, I showed him.
Mhm.
Um, and he grew. And in 1995, by that time, John Perkins had started the Christian Community Development Association, and I was a part of that association. And in '95, we had our conference in Denver. And at that conference,
Okay.
surprise to me and to Jimmy, we were brought up on stage and given the Tom Skinner Leadership Award. Now, what's significant about
Okay.
that is that here we are, we're on stage, and there are about, I think at that time, there are about 200 people in the conference.
Mhm.
These are all Christian leaders from around the nation working in urban communities. Now, what happens when you see a Christian leader from the hood now is a leader? What happens? You know you're successful when other people come after your leaders, because that's
Yep.
exactly what
When they're
happened.
trying to get yep, exactly. Exactly.
and and so a year later, he went and he worked with another organization. He went to
Mhm.
Dallas, and for a year he worked with them. And then after that year, he started his own ministry. And when he started his
Okay.
own ministry, when he left us, one thing he felt was that I had not discipled him. He felt like somehow I just had, and it was sporadic. We try and get together, we get together a little bit, and then we stop, and then we get back together again, we stop. But he felt like I had not discipled him, and I felt like I hadn't either. At that time, in my understanding of discipleship at that time, I felt like I had failed. But after he spent a year on his own, working, developing his ministry, he came to me and he says, Ted, I thought you had failed me when it came to discipleship. But when I got on my own, I started to remember everything you ever taught me.
You taught me.
And that
Yeah,
taught me
yeah,
something about discipleship. That was another clue. Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Then the third clue came when another young lady got involved in our ministry. Her name was Raquel, and her mother had gotten involved with a group that my wife has started earlier called MOPS, Mothers of Preschoolers, Urban. My wife started the first urban um, um, Mothers of Preschoolers program. um yeah, and uh she was struggling in school, and my wife said, let's, is there any way we can get her in here? And so we brought her on first as
Hmm.
a receptionist, and then as she got involved with the ministry, she started working with our young people. And then we had started an emerging leaders program. These high school students that were a part of our program, but they were set apart in a specific leadership program. They would run our elementary program. So we would have a small group of elementary kids. They would work with them. They, as a team, they would take turns and learning leadership roles. And what they did for a couple hours each week,
Hmm.
they would do for 4 to 5 weeks in the summer to run our summer day camp. Well,
Okay.
Raquel got very involved in that, and she just flourished. And it was interesting because it's like, and she's told me this later. She said, when I'm away from here, then I have to be on my guard. But when I'm here, when I'm at neighborhood, I can be myself.
Hmm.
And that's where she really flourished. Something else happened with her that was another clue a little later on, when she had some doubts about running the summer day camp. She says, I'm not a kid person, so I'm not sure I should be doing this. And I said, well,
Yeah,
I know you care for the kids. um I said, you don't try to be someone you're not. Don't try to be
yeah.
a kid person. Utilize your skills on their behalf.
Hmm. Okay.
And that freed her to focus not on the kids, but on the emerging leaders, the ones running the program
Oh,
and
good. Okay.
creating a solid program. She is an event planner today.
Isn't that
So
crazy?
again, these were all clues. And
Hmm.
so at the beginning, John asked that question: how do we build incentive? And after 30 years, I said, I think I found the answer. And it's fun, and I put it in terms of an equation. Um, First, God created mankind uniquely in His image. We are
Hmm.
all uniquely created in God's image. That means we
Okay.
all have communicable attributes, a blend of communicable attributes that are a part of who we are. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, and the second thing is that God has so designed human development that at the adolescent stage, the great quest is for identity, answering the
Yeah.
question, who am I? Why am I here? Does my life matter? Well, I put those two together and came up with an answer. We are called to create an environment. We create an environment in which youth can discover who they are in Christ, Jesus as their creator, as well as their savior. So when you want to know what the purpose of youth ministry is, that's it. For working with adolescent, pre-adolescent, that is the focus. And I've discovered that when ministries put that at the center of what they do, it transforms their ministry. And
They
so
flourish. Yeah.
it just begins to flourish. So I created this. I began to ask the question: well, if this is what it is, then what do we do? one of the things I did early on in those rap sessions, which led to, and I was very influenced by Francis Schaeffer. And one of the things he talked about was honest answers to honest questions. And I realized that most youth leaders are trained to lead, but not to develop leaders, and that they're trained to be able to bring kids together, have a lot of fun, and then tell them about Jesus. Well, I discovered that no, we don't tell them about Jesus. We bring Jesus to the point of their felt need. And that
Mm.
requires honest answers to honest questions. And
Yeah.
so we designed our program so that at the very beginning, this is for middle school as well as high school, but particularly for middle school kids, we tell them, hey, we're going to have a great time. You're going to have got a great program lined up for you. This is going to be great. But there's one thing we're going to ask you to do. At some point in time, we're going to ask you to think. Now, when we do
Woo!
that, understand we're not going to hurt you. We're not going to make you do this for a long time. But when that time comes, you must engage. So, right at the very beginning, we say
You must
that
engage.
is an element within our time together. And the idea is to put a fantastic program together so they want to come. Because you're competing with all other kinds of programs. But again, Francis Schaeffer, he talked about systems. Don't be afraid of creating a system. You have school system, you have community systems, you've got family systems, many times dysfunctional family systems. You have to create a system to combat the other systems. But in our system, you have the elements of honest answers to honest questions. You begin your program by having the kids write down any question they have regarding God, Christianity, or life, and then you gather those questions, and from there you figure out what their felt needs are, and those become the topics of your sessions. So when you come together and you talk, you start talking about the issues that they raised, and you
Hmm.
seek honesty there. No God talk. This is not a Sunday school class where the kid is trying to impress the teacher. No, what do you really think? What are you living by? What is influencing you? What are you struggling with regard to this issue? And then at the end, no more than 5 minutes, the leader does, well, kind of what Jesus did in the Sermon on the Mount. You have heard it said, but now I say unto you. And so in those 5 minutes, you give them God's perspective. Where is God in all of this? And that becomes an overarching question that's able to be raised at any time.
Yeah.
I was driving the kids. I was in the van driving the kids someplace, and I was talking about setting up this program and talking about the logistics. And a kid asked us, "Where's God in all that?"
Mm.
And I said, that's a great question.
That's wonderful.
And so you create this environment of discovery. And a key is thinking. You get them thinking, asking questions. What happens is with your group, they start asking the questions in your group that they can't ask anywhere else. They're evaluating everything else going on in their life, but they come in here, they can talk about it. Look at what happened here. Look at what happened there. What do you think of that? Where is God in all this? And how does he allow this? But you ask the honest questions, and you dig deep into that, okay? Um, that's one thing. The second thing is apprenticing. You must create something that your emerging leaders can do where they have responsibility and authority in running a program. For us, the best thing for us to do was to have that prepare them to run the summer day camp. So what they did with elementary kids for a couple hours a week, they would do 4 to 5 weeks during the summer. And we discovered that this took process. This is a
Hmm.
process. We start in January. We do our official hires then. And then from February, March, April, and May, they are going through the process of preparing to run the summer day camp. And so, we make it we make it interactive. They have to be able to create this. The idea is I sketch, they color. I'll put up on a wall all the components of the summer day camp.
Hmm.
Name all components. And then they'll sit around a table, and actually Raquel and I, we put in front of each of them a stack of stickies. We called this exercise stickies. Eh, and then we would talk a little bit about what the theme of the camp's going to be. This is back in February.
What a term,
What's the
right?
theme? What's the theme going to be? And then what do you
Uh-huh.
think sort of should be happening in here? Okay, they have this thing on the wall. Okay, and so then we basically turns into a 10-minute brain dump. For 10 minutes, they get to write down every idea they have regarding what should be happening in this summer day camp. One idea per sticky. And as they write it down and they put it to the side, we're walking around the table, picking them up, and just randomly, as we'll look at it and just make a judgment call, stick it up on the board. We do that for 10 minutes. Then the timer goes off,
Hmm.
pens are down, and then we look at it and we take each one and we read it, and together we decide where should this go. And then we have a second sheet. We put them where they say it should go. When the process is over, 75 to 80% of the guts of the program have been decided upon. And the key is it's by
Wow.
their design. Okay, so now
Which is
they
huge.
they own it.
Yeah.
They've invested in it, and now they've got to pull it off. So now they've got to work. They've got to work on putting all this thing together. And part of this is learning centers. Each of them are as teams, depending on how many leaders you have. They will run a. They will teach a class, and the students will rotate between those classes. Okay, and they have to put these classes together. And so we tell them, we kind of threaten them. We say, you know what it's like to be in a classroom, and the you see spitwads being thrown at the teacher. In fact, you may have been some of those kids who are sitting in the back throwing the spitwads at the teacher. Well, guess what? Now you're the teacher. How are you going to
Yeah,
teach
you're
in
the
such a
teacher.
way so that the kids aren't going to throw spitwads at you? And so we- so they have to be creative. They whatever theme they have for their room, the room has got to scream it. They got to put pictures up and different kinds of paraphernalia up there to show that when they walk into their classroom, this is what they're going to be talking about. They have to be creative about how about what they're learning. Um, and so these things are
Well, let me
happening.
let me just stop you for. Yeah,
Sure,
let me. I just want to jump in here real quick because I want to rewind a little bit because I want to get to where you're going,
you bet.
but I want to make
Okay,
a
got yeah,
couple
yes, sir.
eraser
Of
points that
course.
are in here. Is you're giving us a master class in developing leaders, which is cool, right? And I want folks that are watching to understand this is what's going on because it could be going because it's so good. But what I kind of want to know before we even get to that is your identity because you brought up identity a few times in our conversation now.
Yes, yes,
How did you
yes.
get from an identity that allowed you, hey, you're coming from Vienna, you're coming from, now you're in 5 Points and you're doing Youth for Christ, and now you got your own thing, but you're not, because you told me it's to separate leadership and leading somebody is different than developing a leader. So how did you get
Yes,
the skill
yes.
set, or what was your identity that allowed you to develop leaders? Because as
Uh,
I'm thinking and I'm listening, I'm like, well, I want to do what he's doing, but I kind of want to know what you had to go through to become that person who could
you
then
know,
begin to develop
yeah.
leaders.
I think that there was a moment in
Hope I didn't throw
time.
you off too much, but
No, 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 it's okay. It's okay. No, no, no. There was a moment in time when I realized something. I had a lot of accolades in high school. A lot of success in high school. A lot of success as a musician. I had success early on with ministry, but something happened to me early on where I realized that it was not about me. I came
Mm,
across a poem by Walt Whitman, and in that poem he says, "I am the teacher of athletes. He that by me spreads a wider breast than my own proves the width of my own." And I began to realize that this is not about me. This is about them. Most youth leaders come into youth ministry thinking that I'm going to come in and I'm going to save these kids. I'm going to give them what they do not have. I'm going to help them. And I began to
mhm,
realize that that's not the right way to think. I think it's a Donald Miller who wrote a book on story branding, and he talks about the basic use the plot of a story to kind of share your message, be
mhm,
effective in sharing your
mhm,
message. And the basic story plot is you have a hero, a leader, who has a problem, and he meets a guide who helps the hero get answers to their figure out how to solve the problem, so that they're able to solve their problem and not fail. Well, I began to realize that in youth ministry, youth aren't entering our story, we're entering their
mhm.
story. And so the idea is, what does God want me to do? God has brought me into the story of this young person. How do I enter the kingdom agenda that God has for this kid? And what is my role in that? So once I realize that it's not about me, it's about them. I've entered their story. God wants to do something with this young person. He's created him and her uniquely in his image. What does he want to do with them? And what role do I play in helping them discover it? And so
Yeah.
that changed everything. It just changed everything. And I think most leaders, they try so hard they want to position themselves so they can make a difference in a person's life, but they don't realize that, God already wants to make a difference in that kid's life. And he's brought you into the story to help him do
Mhm,
that, which means you have to equip yourself to do that. I'm working on an online course. I did the first part of it. It was unleashing the power of transformational discipleship.
mhm,
But I need to write the I need to create the second course, which is foundations of animation, because many youth leaders do not understand that this takes a different posture. This is true servant leadership here. This is not about you. This is God calling you to use you in the life of another. That's different. You have a high and holy calling. And
wow,
really, when it comes to the urban world, I mean, this is probably the most under examined aspect of mission. I mean, people do not recognize the importance of what the youth leader that's running a youth club, that's the youth pastor. I don't think youth leaders understand how significant their role is. Most people fail to see, or what they see is that, hey, just love on the kids, just get them through high school. Okay, that's all you got to do, and you'll be fine. They'll be fine. Well, what happens is you're ignoring this moment where they really need to
mhm.
figure out who they are in order to move forward. Okay, and because of
Yes.
that, they take their lack of understanding or their misunderstanding of that into their adult years, and that's what the adults have to deal with. They do not realize that it
Yeah.
starts in that age, and God designed it this way. He designed it this way. Adolescents are searching for their identity. We need to help them find an answer to their question, the kind of answer that's going to lead them into the future. And so, yeah,
Yeah,
that's different.
that's how you did it. And what's so amazing about what you're saying, and I can see why that has transferred into developing other leaders, is because what you're saying, at least this is what I'm hearing, and I say this every morning in my devotional that I do online, and I say, you are the answer
Yeah,
to somebody else's prayer. However, you
yeah,
don't get to decide what that answer is
yeah,
and how
yeah,
it's
yeah,
said.
yeah,
You have to be available to let God use you in a way that would allow it. And I hear you saying, okay, wait a minute. We can't decide for them how we're going to do it and what they need in order to be the future that God has for them. And that's
hmm
where you
hmm
say, wait a minute, no, we're going to design it and meet them where they're at,
yeah,
and then we're going
yes,
to help guide them based on what God is showing us their
yeah,
needs are. And
yeah,
that's a huge
right,
mistake, I think, in whether it's youth ministry or any leadership position, where we've decided what they need, not only what they need, but how they're going to get it, and then what they're going
yeah.
to look like when they're done. And that's so
I've
backwards.
I have met many leaders that have done that. They think that they know better than God or the kid, and so they say they really think that this is what God has called them to do, and it
Mhm,
becomes manipulative and
mhm.
coercive. It can get really ugly, um, and not even realize it. Not even realize that that's what
Oh
they're
no,
doing.
they're doing good,
Um,
right? Their heart is in the right
so
spot,
yeah,
but they
yeah,
haven't
yeah,
been exposed to just saying, wait a minute, what is
yeah,
my purpose here? What does
yeah,
God have
yeah,
me doing here? And my job is
yeah.
not to judge and to put them in a
Right,
place, right?
right, right. Yeah, I think that in particular, I think church youth groups can create this kind of environment because you need to create, again, as Francis Schaeffer talked about, a system. There has to be a safe place where
Mhm,
this can happen. And the youth leader somehow has to, it doesn't have to be huge. It could be in your home. It doesn't matter as long as it's consistent and as long as it's something. And it can also be a part of any ministry. You may have an arts ministry or a sports program or something. It doesn't matter. Okay, but if within
mhm.
that you've got these elements that are consistently happening where you're causing them to think. They're thinking about, okay, who am I? Why am I here? And I'm getting my
Yeah,
questions answered, and I'm figuring out where God is in all of this and what this all means. You're creating that environment that's taking that where all this can take place. It doesn't have to be large. Again, God always has the best ideas. So you don't
yeah,
have to have a big. You don't have to create a school. You don't have to create this big operation. It can be very small. But within that, if you're doing this transformational type of work, if you understand the foundations of animation and how to make this happen. Look, I got a letter a few weeks ago from a guy. He is a youth pastor in rural Minnesota.
okay.
About a decade ago, I worked with the Christian Leaders Institute, and I designed a class for them that they're still using to this day. And it's international. It's in 170 countries. Okay. But I got a call from this kid that was just finishing up. Kid, I guess I don't know if he's a kid or not, but he's a youth worker,
Mhm,
and he's finishing up his work, and he took my course, and he says he says you need to know that I work with youth that come from a distance of 20 miles in either direction, and he says and it covers two states. I'm talking serious rural Minnesota. He says, and so the thing about living among the people you serve, I'm not sure how well it applies to me because my youth are coming from so many different directions. I said, but everything else you said, Everything else you said about creating the environment, honest answers to honest questions, helping youth apprentice, giving them something that's meaningful to them, that's going to make a difference in their lives. Just all of that was spot on. And so, yeah, the, someone once asked me, does this just apply to urban youth?
Urban youth
And I
ministry,
said,
yeah.
urban youth
Oh
ministry.
no.
And I said, no, I said, not really. I said, no, not really. The things we discovered about this is this should be happening in youth ministry across, around the globe, all kinds of youth. This is something that should be happening everywhere. But I I have a bias. I'm committed to
That's
urban youth ministry, and I
yeah.
don't want to happen to transformational discipleship what happened to Montessori. Maria Montessori discovered her method of working with youth in the ghettos of Rome. And yet today, oh, I know there are places. I have friends overseas that utilize Montessori in poor communities, but for the most part, here in the states,
It's for the
it's
affluent.
for the middle upper class. I don't want that to happen. Even though the principles are biblical principles, they're biblical precepts that are real in any setting, any circumstance, but it is desperately needed within the urban community.
Talk to me a little bit about, one of the things that I'm super, I guess, awareness or attentive to is being present in conversations where you put
Yeah,
down your devices, you put down your phone, and you're literally looking at the person that you're talking to. But at the
yeah,
same time, you talked about answering or allowing folks to ask questions, or the kids in their
yes,
lives and whatever there is they're able to ask questions. And as a leader, sometimes we try to shy away from those questions because we might not know the answers, right?
yes,
And so we
yes,
say it's better
yes,
not to ask a
yes.
question at all because I can't help.
Oh
Talk to me about
no,
how do we
oh no.
deal with that, because that's so important in our conversations.
Well, you may not have the answers, but you can find them. You can find the answers.
Thank you.
There has to be honesty. There has to be
Yeah.
honesty. We have to be dealing with things as they are. When kids talk about the struggles that they have, those struggles are deep and they hurt, and we need to not shy away from anything. But we also need to realize that Jesus didn't shy away from anything. God does not shy away from anything. Many times, youth leaders who are working with young people have an idea of God that is not real. That it's a fabrication in their minds, is what they would hope it would be. It's kind of flowery, which is why they never get to the real issues. The scriptures say that the Messiah is a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. Well, so many youth leaders, I hear youth leaders talking to kids. I'm sure the kids are thinking, well, Jesus has no idea about my grief. But the reality
Mhm.
is that he does. It's the leader that doesn't realize that Jesus is well acquainted with that young person's grief. So that's the two-edged sword here in transformational discipleship and other kinds of youth ministry. You can get away with shying away from things because all you're doing is just babysitting. You can get away with that. But if you're serious about helping kids see the living God, that means you got to see him too. So that means you've got to grow up. You have to allow God to you cannot bring about transformation in other people unless you are allowing God to transform you. And again, and that makes this ministry exciting, dynamic. Most youth leaders burn out after 2 years. But if they're
Mhm.
involved in something that's transformative, that's transforming them in the process as they're involved with serving others and seeing God transform others, it's a whole different ball game. Whole different ball game.
We seem to be in a comparison culture right now with social media
Uh-huh.
and everything else, where everything is comparing. And I'm wondering about the leaders that you work with. Are they comparing themselves to other ministries? Are they comparing themselves to other leaders? Are they seeing something online that says, oh, this is how I have to interact with these kids because that's what they told me worked or whatever? How do we get away from everything is about a competition? And I like competition. I shouldn't use that word, but this comparison thing that we see on social media somebody's life that is wonderful, but we don't see their whole life. We see another ministry that we see one is doing well, but that's not what happens all the time. We see that we're dealing with kids and we're having to have conversations with them, but we think we should act or seek some way that's not us. How do we deal with this?
I think, hmm, I think those pressures are always there. Um, but I
Hmm.
think that, I think there's a reason why God says you will have no other gods before me. Why God hates idolatry. It's why he says that compared to your love to me, you must hate everybody else. He uses that kind of hyperbole. I think it's because we don't realize that God gives precepts, ideas. Yeah, he gives us he gives us rules intended to intended to guide thought and behavior. And the more we do that, then the less we it gives us something to um, measure all the other stuff that's coming our way. By what standard do we live? And we just don't realize what is it? Is it Psalm 111:10? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. All who follow his precepts have good understanding, and to him belongs eternal praise. It's the following of God's precepts. We tend to we tend to not listen to what God is saying. God is communicated to us in language that we understand, but we tend to not be paying attention to it. Quick example. One During the summer day
Hmm.
camp, I would serve as the chaplain, and so every morning I meet with the staff. They
Hmm.
share what's going on the day before, and I'd lead them through a little Bible study. Well, at this one point we were looking at a psalm, and I said, "What does the psalm say?" And I had a mixture of kids and leadership. Some were churched, some were not churched. The church kids, it was amazing to see. The church kids, they took their eyes off the scriptures, they accessed their memory banks, and they came up with what they thought was
Hmm.
the best answers to the question. The non churched kids looked at the passage and tried to figure out what it said. And that's the difference. Sometimes we get so conditioned, we just want to say the right
Okay, I love
thing. We just want to say something that sounds spiritual so we come across as spiritual, but we really don't want to hear what God is saying. And that is the difference. We need to be able to hear what the word of God is saying. And we must bring faith into real life. And so
it.
that's why we say no God talk. None of this God talk. If you pull God talk on me, I'm going to challenge you. What do you mean by that? Oh, you say, "Oh, I have faith." What's that? Okay. Yeah. What does
Yeah.
that mean? Okay. You want this to be real. You want God to be. You want God to intervene in this situation so people hear who God is. Yeah. So yeah. And so comparisons.
Well,
You, I think yeah, you do compare, but you need to compare what God says with what everybody else says, and then
there,
respond. You need to
yeah,
hear
not
what
with
God is saying
yeah,
and respond accordingly. Yeah.
I love it.
Oh.
Well, I I hate the fact that we've already talked an hour, which is just so
Yeah.
cool that we're there. And so I want to give you the opportunity to say anything or talk about anything that we didn't get a chance to talk to. But I just want the folks listening now or watching this later. I'm not done with Ted. We are going to figure out some times and some places. There is so much wisdom. I feel like I'm sitting in front of a stage and I'm just wanting to just glean everything I can from you.
Well, thanks.
And there's just not enough time. So we're going to invite you back to our fireside talks. Instead of
Very
maybe a
good.
TED
Very
talk,
good.
we're going to talk with Ted. We're going to do something that's
All
really
right.
fun and cool. But what do you want to make sure everybody gets out of today's conversation today?
Well, I hope people realize that there's an opportunity to make a difference in the lives of young people that we haven't seen. I mean, with embedded in every rough neighborhood across the globe, around the globe, there are Christian leaders that are seeking to make a difference in the lives of those young people. God has placed them there, but they need the tools and the resources to do that. The Center for Transformational Discipleship exists to provide those tools. And so I would just encourage you, if you know of people that could use this kind of support, then please get them in touch with us. The Center for Transformational Discipleship, www.tdinitiative.org. Go to the website, contact me. We would love to serve. We exist to serve. We want to weave transformational discipleship, which is what I've been talking about, into the fabric of urban youth ministry. So
Oh man, thank you. So tdinitiative.org, right?
yes, yes.
All right. Yeah,
tdinitiative.org.
so make sure that you guys go there, check it out. If this is your first podcast, maybe hit subscribe because we're going to have more. Whatever you have to do, to get in to make sure. I promise
You
you, we're going
bet.
to
You
have
bet.
more. We're going to have some more amazing talks. We're going to continue to make sure that you are well equipped to be that answer to prayer. So when God says, "Hey, I'm ready. Are you available?" You're going to say, "Not only am I available, but I'm equipped and I'm prepared." And that's how
Wonderful.
He wants to use
Wonderful.
you. And so, to me, you're God's
Wonderful.
greatest gift.
Wonderful.
He loves you if
Oh,
you allow
thank you,
Him to.
brother.
He wants to wrap His arms around you every single day, and He wants to let you know that you are born for greatness, and the greatness inside you just needs to ooze out all over folks as if it can. And again, you are an answer to somebody else's prayer. So be available. Take this, give us one closing thought, and then we will be out for today, and then we will be back on the next time.
All right. Thank you, brother. Well, listen, God bless you. Thank you for all that you're doing. And yeah, let's continue to make a difference in advancing God's kingdom for his namesake. You bet.
I love it. You guys have an amazing, awesome, just incredible, awestruck day today. We'll talk to you on the next one.